Hello, everyone. It's the Historical Gamer once again, but you can call me Matt, and we're here on episode number 67 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We've got an exciting interview with three different developers of three different games, but they have one thing in common, and that's all that they fall under the resurgent Microprose brand. I'm here with my co-host, Tortuga. I'm really excited for today. How are you doing, Tortuga?
Oh, I'm doing very well. I'm giddy with excitement. This is going to be a really fun podcast. We're really breaking up the usual mold as well, because what's the most people we've had on before? Throw that number right out the window. We got 5 of us on tonight, so this will be fun. And actually, if you don't mind, Matt, maybe I should start introducing the people who are joining us today.
Of course.
We have, from Second Front, we have Joe, leader of Hextra. We have Amiral, who's the heading up Dry Dog Dream Games, making Force Admiral. Hello, Amiral. And we also have with us Nils from Triassic Games, and they're making Sea Power.
One of the interesting things with having the three of you on is that, you know, you all obviously have very different backgrounds from a game development perspective. But I think obviously the common thread here is that you all are publishing your games through Microprose. And, you know, I think something that a lot of folks are probably interested in is Microprose is brand new, right? They've just come back, if you will, from the dead. And I'm curious, your three games are amongst some of the three first games that Microprose is going to be publishing. And I'm curious sort of what the path that you all followed to find Microprose, because it's a name that I think a lot of people haven't heard in a while. So with that being said, why don't we, and we can go around the table and kind of get your stories here, but why don't we go ahead and start with you, Amiral? How did Force Admiral end up with Microprose?
Well, first of all, hello and thanks for having us. So my name, as you said, is Amiral. That's my online name, but you can call me Amiral. I'm the lead designer of Force Admiral. You can call it TFA by Dry Dog Dreams Games, but you can call us DDG, which is TFA is a game about World War II carriers in the Pacific and kicking serious butt with them. And that's one of the main reasons why we ended up with Microprose in the first place. Because, well, let's say that our game wouldn't probably even exist if it wasn't for the original Microprose titles. I don't know if our listeners need an introduction to Microprose as a brand, and maybe we'll come back to this later on. But okay, that's something that inspired not just me, but everybody in the team during our childhood. We are all in our 30-something, so we were right there in the late 80s, early 90s playing these games. And clearly Force Admiral is both heavily indebted to games such as Task Force 1942, which was a game about surface combat in the Solomons, and 1942, the Pacific Air War, which was sort of a follow-up about carrier combat and a flight simulation at the same time. When we kind of went public back in October, 2019, with a technical demo on YouTube of what we were making, then we had David Laghetti, the CEO of the revived Microprose brand, who got in touch with us, and we jumped at this chance to have that name on our box. Having your name associated to this legendary label, it was like a chance I wouldn't let pass. So David, at that point, he had acquired the Microprose label with the intent of investing himself seriously in making grand public games. So besides, also, it's just so happened that Nils had got in touch with me and the team months before, and he was to us like some sort of a mentor as an industry veteran. And we also got to know Joe through Facebook, and he became also a good indie friend. And I thought at that time that I was very glad to have the opportunity of telling David from Microprose, hey, you know what? What we're making here looks good, but have you heard of these other projects? And the rest is history. But of course, I let Nils and Joe tell their own side of the story.
Interesting. So it sounds like you guys all kind of talked amongst each other at least a little bit as you guys were kind of making some of those decisions. I guess, that's a great intro to how Task Force Admiral ended up under the Microprose umbrella. Joe, why don't you share us a little bit of your story and how you came to this and how you ended up with these folks as well?
I'm Joe. I'm the lead developer of Second Front, and I met Amiral on Facebook, and we talked about our games, what we are developing, and then Amiral made contact to Microprose, and finally I also ended there. Yeah, so it's this process was, I think, only a week or so. It goes pretty fast, and then we joined there, and and so my game is not on water. It's a little bit different, and yeah, I do a classic war game with hexagons.
Okay, so Joe, I have a question for you. You said that this all happened within a week, but you knew Amiral before that?
Yes, I knew him before that, yes. I stumbled across his Facebook presentations, and then I talked to him about Task Force 42, what I played a lot in that back times on what was a Microprose game.
So Nils, what's your side of this story? We're interested in knowing how you ended up joining with this, especially because you've already been in. I guess of the three people, Hextra has done some stuff before, Joe and Hextra, but you're definitely part of an already established, or were part of an already established company. So how did it end up with you joining Microprose?
Well, first off, when I was a kid, I grew up and we had a Commodore. One day, my dad, he came home and he brought this blue box with a submarine, and of course, that was Silent Service. And he would play that game religiously, for hours on end, and I would sit next to him, and eventually we would start playing together, where he would be the skipper and I would be the XO. Well, and later on we got more Microprose games, like I think Gunship was the next one, and then I got Airborne Ranger for myself and F-15 and all of them. So kind of grew up with Microprose. It's very, can I say, formative, my childhood. So anyway, fast forward 35 years, and I'd been in the game business for some time. I had worked at EA Dice. I had worked at Tarsier Games, of a Little Big Planet stuff, and I had founded this little company with an Australian guy called Killerfish Games. Well, come 2019, that was no longer a thing, and I had embarked on what would become Triassic Games. Just by chance, one of our members, Premek, he's, by the way, the guy who makes all of the nice 2D art for our games, and he does a lot of nice 3D stuff too. You should check it out. Anyway, he shared this post of some crazy person on Facebook who was posting these awesome shots of World War II carrier ops in 3D, and well, that was exciting. So somehow I ended up in contact with Admiral here, and we started talking, and eventually one thing led to another, and he got us in touch with David Laggerty of Microprose. Our visions aligned, so the rest is history, I guess.
It's funny that you said you used to sit next to your dad with the Silent Service, because I have the exact same memory. For me, it was Silent Service too, but
I was going to say that. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, finally, I have to buy a computer because of Silent Service, and that started all for me.
I'm totally like Tortuga. I mean, we are a few years apart, I think. It's like Tortuga. It's my dad brought Silent Service 2 home, and he would like spend hours and hours on it. Okay, sometimes violent hours because he could get a bit frustrated by the outcome, and I was young, so I wouldn't say I was the EXO like Nils. I would rather say I was the guy hiding under the table whenever they were depth charged. We were getting depth charged, but really, I mean, it's impressive to real. I mean, that's the whole point of being here together today. But to realize that we didn't just started with the same kind of experience. We pretty much all started with the same game.
Well, I will add, I just thought of, I do have a microprose story, not involving my father, but when I was in high school, I used to play a lot of Falcon 4.0, and I loved the aspect of the game being like real time or whatnot. And to make it more realistic, I would leave the game running when I would go to bed. That would like simulate the pilot having to sleep, because that game was very much like you always had to be in the air or the AI would just mess up your strikes and you would end up, losing the war all the time. But I still felt like the idea of jumping into a cockpit like every 20 minutes was a little bit much. So I was like, all right, the guy's got to sleep eventually. So usually sometimes I'd wake up and the war would be lost already, but I would sleep with it in real time. So
yeah, the other one for me was F-19 Stealth Fighter. I remember also the same thing, just sitting next to my dad, and then he'd be like, I think the same thing happened as what Amiral was describing when he ended up getting like a lock on. I was so scared I'd have to leave the room. Oh man, so Microprose, as you said, very formative to our childhoods, and now the rebirth. Now, they haven't released an official game yet, or have they?
I think Warfare 1944 came out.
Oh, that's right.
But I think you all were the first 3 that were announced. I think that Warfare was announced after that. So, when Microprose is sort of coming out and having those initial press releases, I know these were the first 3 that I noticed anyway. And I think that's pretty awesome to see all of your games as they're going through development. And we'll talk a little bit more about your games in a moment here.
I actually have one more quick question, since this is basically the rebirth of this. We all played Microprose games when we were growing up, and now after some time, this is the rebirth. Do you guys feel? Maybe I'll pick on Nils first, and we'll go back from there. But Nils, do you feel any pressure that your game is going to end up deciding the fate of, or partly deciding the fate of Microprose in this rebirth? Do you feel any like additional pressure, or?
Well, so far it feels pretty good. I mean, of course, all of us on the team are under some quite extreme pressure, and but not from Microprose, more like from our retirement fund, if I could put it that way. I mean, we've invested quite a lot of time and effort in the project, and we all do this full time as well. So it's not like we have a lot of fallback options, and of course we have families to feed too. So I guess that's enough pressure already.
I definitely want to hear more sort of back and forth, but I also want to give you guys a moment to kind of talk about your individual games a little bit. So let's take a step back and just kind of talk in a little bit more detail about the 3 different games that you're all working on. Why don't we go ahead and start with you, Joe? Why don't you tell us a little bit about Second Front, what it is the game is, what you're trying to do with it, and we can kind of go from there.
From a PC game perspective, it is a random situation generator. Also, idea is that the players can and will hopefully make their own maps and their own scenarios and upload these scenarios and campaigns and maps to the Steam workshop. So to share and to play and find out new ways to simulate World War II on a tactical level. Also, in terms of tactical, we have troops and and vehicles, and the troops can enter and drive, carried with the vehicles like a truck or whatever, and they can also have firearms like machine guns, what they can carry with them, and so that kind is it is a little bit tactical war game like XCOM. And
Joe, I just have to lend a little bit of ammunition to you because, I'd like to think I know a little something about your game now, after having sat in on you have like this really interesting garage mode, and like you have all these different designs. So I can't remember the number, but it's something like 200 different vehicles or tanks, something like this, right?
Yeah, it is about 260 in the moment. It's growing. Come more. The ammunition in usual PC games, you have all this. You are bullet counting. You have 10 rounds of this ammunition and 12 of that, and we don't have that. We have only certainties that this ammunition is still in place after the shot. So that's a little bit dramatic. So you don't never know what will happen. Is that weapon working or not? So that's for a PC game, a radical different approach to bullet counting. I think from my design perspective, when doing a game, and then you have to provide something new. You cannot do such thing like a clone. You have to add new things. So that is my my thinking about gaming.
And I'm really curious to see like what people do with this, to your point around like making scenarios and things like that. One, I think the art style is actually pretty intriguing. I personally really like it.
And usually you have art style, and then there is a demand of that must be super beautiful, and it must be, and that means then that is super realistic, and then then you have a super realistic graphics. Wow, okay. I think that's that is not the way I want to go. It is not cinema. Yeah, it is not a realistic movie. And it should not want to be that. It's a game, and a game has to show what it is, or what anything means in the game. We have about 20 different terrain types. So there are walls and hedges between the hexes, which are very important, and there are different kinds of woods, and all these terrain types are very different, have different effects on gameplay, and so I have to very clear to show this hex is that terrain type and not that, and so the game must be very clear for the use of for the player, so he can calculate his risk to move behind the hedge or cross the field directly into the enemy fire, and when that would be super realistic, then it would be also super unclear what is where.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting approach to game design, because so often people are just clamoring for it needs to be the most realistic thing possible. But to your point, sometimes realism gets in the way of game design. So when you're talking about Second Front, which is a turn-based, hex-based war game, and you are trying to convey to people what different effects of terrain are going to have, of buildings are going to have, if you don't make it clear to the user, no player is going to be happy if they get confused, if it's not clear what the game is actually telling you. And, even in the name of realism, I'm not sure it's a good game design if everything's grayed out and sort of washed out. And it's like, well, that's a realistic look of a countryside. That might be true, but this is a game. And to your point, it needs to be clear to the player, is that a stone wall? Is it a wheat field? Is it a barn? And what are those impacts going to be on me as a player? And so I think that's an interesting push and pull that any game designer experiences when they go to try and design a game, because people are always clamoring for realism, but they're also clamoring for clarity. And I think you're kind of conveying an interesting push and pull on these types of games. But then I know you've got like more than 80 different like building types with a whole bunch of variations. And I think this could really be interesting to see the different kind of scenarios and things that folks make. I know like American units, Russian units, German units, they're all included in those 200 plus units that you mentioned earlier. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of, obviously I know Tortuga, you've had a chance to see the game in a little bit more depth than I have, but I know it's something that I've definitely got my eye on and I'm looking forward to. But, with that being said, I mean, every game kind of has its own approach to art and how they decide to, represent different figures and things in games. Amiral, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your project, Task Force Admiral, and how you've approached that game and what you're trying to accomplish with your game.
It's a bit intimately related, to how actually I came to actually develop a game, because unlike Joe and especially Nils, I'm not on the programming side of things. I mean, I could generously call myself a lead designer, but to say things as they are, that's the first game I actually designed. My own experience before that was all about modding and making scenarios for games like M1 Tank Platoon 2 or European Air War, both of them from Microprose. Noms Kolger's The Operational Art of War. In that case, and also if I may say, I mean, when I was in my very early 20s, I happened to be I would say pretty much a part-time apprentice gaming journalist, specialized in simulation and history. And at that time, I had a good idea of what existed, and I had played a lot of stuff. And even though I told myself, okay, first you gotta study, you gotta have a career and all that, ever since then I had something in my mind about wanting to kickstart, in a way or another, my own project. So there was the fact that I wanted to do something else in terms of command. This is something that we see in the way we treat our commanders and the comms. I mean, we want them to have the commanders. We want them to have some sort of basic personality that account for their known traits in combat, as they were reported by historians. Being more or less aggressive, more or less cunning, stuff like that, or being more in confidence when using radar in the case of the Americans. And this is the kind of stuff already, for instance, that existed in Game Lab's games. I mean, then again, I think you're pretty familiar with the designs. This is one of the perks of Ultimate General Gettysburg years ago. That tactical commanders, would that the opponent, the AI, would have certain personality traits that would make it behave differently when fighting the player. Where I thought that it was a good idea that we could put at the tactical level, which means that our tactical units, which are task forces, but also our strategic commands, which are the people above the task forces giving orders to the tactical commands. Well, they usually, in real life, they have objectives, but sometimes these objectives are conflicting, even within the same force. Sometimes these people, they take coherent tactical behaviors that end up in strategic blunders due to a lack of intelligence or judgment. This is what happened to Admiral Nagumo at Midway, for instance. And then there are the comms also, these orders in real life They are being processed through command nodes that take time to be acknowledged and executed, and sometimes need to be repeated or are not well understood. So, it's all about actually the field we're trying to, the topic we're trying to simulate. It's a topic that is not containing a few mistakes. I mean, it's made from mistakes. Even some of these victories at that time, they are just about one of the sides making better decisions, but not even knowing that it was making a better decision. There's a lot of luck involved, and that's at the very core of the naval experience at the time. And still, for decades, nobody has even tried to recreate the environment you need for all these mistakes to take place. And even though we only have touched, the first layer of that in games like Fighting Steel or Steam and Iron, where you can have at the division level, you can have divisions that do not acknowledge the order, or some ships that miss a turn. Well, this same logic we wanted to bring it to the next level over it. So over the single ship level. I mean, that is at the strategic level or grand tactical level. There's one thing. The second thing, I would say, it's all about the technical approach that we picked for Task Force Admiral. It's a simulation-based approach. I mean, definitely we are a war game, but we are a war game like, Gravity games are war games. That is a simulation engine that is being used for a command simulation. So this is something that we share with other products we have much love and respect for. I mean, this is the case of Gravity. This is the case maybe of even, we could say, Combat Mission. You see a game like the games like the Gravity games, they allow you to play as battalion commanders, but they use the same tech for the inspiring line of tank simulators that are made under the same label. Well, that's the same for us. For a long time, when you were making a World War II naval game, you would always simulate one aspect at the expense of all others, I mean, carrier games like the Pacific Air War, Carrier Model, or Carriers at War, they would be very nice about carrier ops, but they would propose you a very limited surface and submarine component. Surface games like Task Force 1942 or Fighting Steel, they got rid of planes and subs altogether. So we wanted to be given a chance to break that paradigm and come up with a system that would allow all dimensions to coexist properly, all the way up from a gun station to a theater like the South Pacific. And we decided to start our trek by focusing on carriers, but technically, in the long term, we want to be able to bring the series to any scale, any topic we want.
Well, I've been watching the art that you've been producing for your game, Amiral. I mean, I'm a man who doesn't like to get his expectations too high up because they've been destroyed so many times by other games that just didn't live up to the hype that I had created for them. And I find myself hating you a little bit just because I'm starting to have this expectations. The art you're releasing is beautiful, but one of the things I haven't really locked down is what is the exact playstyle for your game? Is it going to be like something where you mentioned Radio Commander, something like this where you're giving orders and there's a lot of unknown uncertainty, but you have that top-down vision? Do you have any short overview of what a gameplay loop will be like in your game?
Yeah, my first thinking was all about command, and that's why I claim that it's a war game at heart. The map you're seeing in most of our screenshots and all that, the flag plot, it's where the Admiral commands from. That's supposed to be the main environment. You have the comms over there, you have the intel, you have everything you need to command units on the field, if I may say, but still a naval game. And yes, indeed, you need to make an interpretation of whatever comes up. so as to decide what is your course of action. This is the basic experience. You're going to be one of these admirals, and you're going to have to make decisions for yourself based on limited intel. But at the same time, we are doing a 3D game, so obviously you can really, set the difficulty level. You can really decide what kind of experience you want. You want the extreme common experience, the one we have here. You can do it. You click a few switches. You get the Carriers at War experience because maybe you like it better when it plays like a normal war game. And even below that, you click another few switches, and you can actually, follow your planes and all that, and have something that is closer to I would call it a battle stations experience. So it's all about customizing it, and it's possible only because we decided to go for a simulation engine to begin with.
I see. Yeah, so I already got the sense that there was more of a simulation focus on that. And of course, it's nice to, as many options as you can throw at people, I'm sure that they'll enjoy to have. Now, Nils, you're also doing a sea game, judging by the title, Sea Power, right? How would you compare or contrast, or why don't you just take the floor and tell us a little bit about your game?
Well, I would say that it's pretty much all the cool stuff they know from World War II, but it has supersonic missiles, so it must be better. Much cooler. Lots of explosions.
So the game is a real-time naval combat game in the missile era, and that's part of the title, right? Is a spiritual successor to something like Jane's Fleet Command, which was sort of an old classic,
absolutely,
from years back, or what is that the experience you're trying to drive, or like where did the idea for this come out of?
Now we have to go back into my childhood again.
I played a lot of Jane's Fleet Command, by the way, too, so it works for my childhood, too.
Well, I was an adult by the time that came out, but when I was like 9, we got Red Storm Rising on the Amiga. And, my dad, he didn't really like that because, it was too modern and it wasn't World War II enough, and it was a bit too complex and abstract. But I really liked it, and I poured over the manual, and I learned all of these intriguing concepts that were laid out, like thermal layers, different sorts of sonars and radars and guided missiles and whatnot. And I sort of fell in love with these cool Soviet ships that were in the game, especially when I looked them up in the books. We had a bunch of small marine calendar type books that had all the ships from every navy. So I would pick up one of those books and look at the pictures. And eventually I started building, these little small 1 to 1250 scale models, ship models. So it's because I started wargaming a little bit by then. So I would look at pictures and make drawings, and I would build these ships out of balsa wood and cut off guitar strings and paint them. And I gravitated towards these modern ships. I think the first model I ever built was a Lee class guided missile cruiser. So anyway, fast forward a couple of decades, and I'm at a position in my life where I had finally been able to make a spiritual sequel to Red Storm Rising, which I of course loved, and that was of course Cold Waters. And so Cold Waters is pretty much, it's Red Storm Rising, but it has influence from SSN and Fast Attack as well, which are like my 3 favorite sub-sims. So over the course of that game, I of course built all of these Soviet ships in 3D, and of course the more you work on something, the more you learn about it, and eventually I started to see the potential for making like a more surface-themed game on the same Cold War theme, because no one had done that. I mean, I guess you have things like Harpoon and Command, but these are very, to me at least, they're dry, serious experiences, which isn't really my forte. I mean, I prefer more action-oriented approaches, but at the same time, I don't want all-out arcade action, which is where something like, say, Battle Stations fails a bit for me, because it is too much into like Ace Combat with battleships. So what I want is really something like like Red Storm Rising or F-19. but with, of course, missile ships. Well, I started working on such a concept, and then things happened. The guy I was working with at Killerfish Games, he would rather be doing something else. So I eventually put together a new team with Premek, one of the artists from Cold Waters and Atlantic Fleet, and also we have a really good programmer, Martin. And he made the first real 3D, or one of the first real 3D submarine simulators for mobiles. First we were pursuing a different project because legal reasons, but eventually I got matters sorted out, and so we got access to the art made for Cold Waters, which enabled us to sort of get a running start onto this new, what would become Sea Power. And originally, the concept was always to have this external camera-based gameplay, but then we also wanted a dynamic campaign because we love dynamic campaigns, and I always thought that the type of campaign we had in Atlantic Fleet really has a lot of potential for interesting depth of play. So I suggested this to the other guys, and they were like totally on board and enthusiastic. And we kind of just kept working on it since. But over time, it has definitely matured into more of a fleet command type direction, where there's less emphasis on like the battle stations type action, because as we eventually figured out, what works well with 40mm Bofors and 5-inch guns doesn't really translate well to supersonic missiles that can strike targets 200 nautical miles away.
And obviously, Sea Power is a real-time 3D naval combat game during the Cold War, assuming the Cold War went hot. And so you've got, surface naval battles, including like air combat as well. Submarines, I'm assuming, are in this as well?
Yes, there are submarines, and in the campaign there's quite a heavy emphasis, as in real life, on anti-submarine operations.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you mentioned there being a dynamic campaign, but then you also kind of mentioned going a little bit more the Fleet Command route. So are you guys still sticking with the dynamic campaign? Because I know Fleet Command was like all scenario based.
Yeah, of course we're sticking with the dynamic campaign. Where the Fleet Command comparison comes in is really in the style of play. Like when you're playing the tactical component, when you're playing an engagement, that's quite heavily inspired by Fleet Command, because Fleet Command works really well. And of course, we also have influences from battle stations. Like there's a lot of interface stuff that battle stations does really well in a streamlined way. And design philosophies for this project, which is different from the previous ones, is that this time we really tried to design the interface with user experience in mind. What that means is that everything needs to be easily available, and you should be able to issue even complex orders with just a few mouse clicks or maybe a hotkey. And like in the previous games, like Cold Waters, for instance, there's too much of a reliance on pop-up UI windows with lots of graphical buttons on them. When I designed that UI, which I've, by the way, I have gigabytes upon gigabytes of UI concept art. So that shows what a horrible designer I am. But at the time, I had a desire to what's a word verisimilitude or something. Like I wanted the UI windows to look like an actual like CRT consoles that you would find in the control room of a sub, and all of that just turns out to be it's too inflexible, and it's too much of an effort to work with. So we completely rethought that for Sea Power, and we're going for a very modern, very minimalist approach that is heavily based upon context menus and interaction, being able to interact in the 3D world and on the map, the tactile map that you have. The tactile map is kind of your primary interface, and you can rescale it, you can maximize it, and then we have like a quick access bar at the bottom where you can quickly select weapons and issue specific movement orders. And then we have a context menu for everything else, and we have just a few pop-up windows for flight ops and the message log and the damage readout. So on the campaign level, it's the actual map resembles the one from Atlantic Fleet. The idea is currently is the same, but you assemble task forces and you deploy them to zones, and in the zones you can perform scouting operations, you can perform other special operations. Perhaps you can you will get intel reports what the enemy might be up to. So if you have intel that they're planning to transit a pack of subs through the Geoc Gap into the western approaches, then you would deploy your anti-submarine forces and have them perform barrier patrols and naval search until you find the enemies and can hopefully deal with them in the...
I'm curious, so those like intel reports, is it perfect information? Like if you get a report, is it always accurate, or is there like an element of fog of war to it?
Oh, there's definitely an element of fog of war. So one of the things that, for instance, Cold Water skipped on completely, like in Cold Waters, you have satellites and you have maritime patrol aircraft, and you will get, as you know, mission orders that tell you that Soviets or the Chinese, they're gonna move a bunch of subs this way within 7 days. And since you know where they're going, you plan your intercept, and that's it. And this is kind of the same idea. So we simulate both like SOSUS reports, detections by allied nations, and of course there's a human intelligence component to it as well. Like one concept is that if you have submarines, you can try and land spec ops forces at zones that contain enemy bases, and they can provide forward intelligence on operations, or they can perform sabotage. And one of the differences, of course, the campaign layer operates in turns, much like Atlantic Fleet does. So there's you don't have to micromanage by like plotting waypoints for every single airplane under your command. It's more like if you have a base, you have a radius of action, you select a plane type. For instance, if you want to send P3 Orions to patrol the area around the Faroes, you just deploy them there, and they can maintain a patrol station until you tell them to go search elsewhere. And it sort of manages itself, limited only by plane availability at the base and the mission rate.
At this point, I know we've been going for a little bit. You guys have all had a chance to talk about your games. So I think what we're trying to do now for at least the next couple of minutes before we wrap is give a chance for you guys to kind of maybe answer similar questions or go back and forth a little bit, have a little bit more of a roundtable type discussion about some of this stuff.
Well, here, let me step in and swing in a different way then. One thing that I've heard each of you talk about in your games is intelligence reports or visibility, or, basically something about the level of information you're displaying to players. So maybe we can talk a little bit, and you guys can talk about the differences or the similarities between your different games and how you address fog of war.
Oh yeah, fog of war is from a game design perspective a very difficult thing. So when you play a game, that is not the game design perspective. You play it, and then it is like it is. So when you play chess, there is no fog of war. Or maybe one example would be prison architect. So when you have fog of war, what they don't have in that game, then you would not see, you maybe would only see that prisoners what are in line of sight of the guards. It would be a completely different game. And they decide, no, they don't want to do that. You have kind of God view with no fog of war in that game. And from a player perspective, yeah, you even don't notice fog of war. It is there, it is not there. It is a hard fog of war where anything out of line of sight is absolutely invisible. Wow, that's realistic. But from playing that game, it would be pretty hard. I listened to a very interesting video of the game developer conference where one guy told, that was the interesting part to me because it was a similar game. They had a big dungeon with a lot of line of sight and obstacles, and they had a complete fog of war on that. And then, they reported it was a huge failure because the player were very angry because they thought the AI is spawning out of the nothing. Yeah. So the AI moved through the dungeon around the player and then attacked him from the back, coming out of there. And the players did not believe that this move through this unseen part by the AI units was correctly handled. They only saw, wow, they spawn out of nothing. That moment let me think a lot about that, and I think when you have only a few units, maybe in ships or airplanes or submarines, then it's okay when these few enemy units are out of view, invisible. But when you have a lot of units, then this could be a little bit dangerous, because the player maybe not like that. And in game design, you always have this, what will the player think about that? Is that the right way? Will he like that? Will he dislike that? And then you have to make hard decisions. So I have in my game 3 levels of fog. There are units what are very hidden, especially anti-tank guns. They cannot move much, and they will be set up hidden when it's in a suitable terrain. And some little parts of the infantry are hidden. But in general, I show the units in the distance, and they show up with question marks, so you don't know what kind of unit is that. Is that infantry? Is that a tank? No, you don't know. And you can they keep these question marks until they have a fire effect on them, or they self-move or fire in a line of sight. But this fog of war is a very difficult thing. The player then argument, or they try to say that is realistic or that is unrealistic. And when you have a simulation, then you must do it realistic. But when you have a battlefield view from the top, where you move a lot of units around, then you are already in some kind of not real simulation thing. Then you are in a more game, perhaps chess-like thing. I think different games should have different kind of fog of war, and it's very hard to decide what and how much fog of war you want to have.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting perspective, and you mentioned something at the start of that really kind of perked my interest. You mentioned going to a gaming conference, seeing obviously games that are sort of on demonstration there, seeing what sort of a player's response was to an activity there. I'm curious, is that something that like you all, like Amiral or Nils, like is that something that you guys go to a lot of conferences? I know maybe not right now with the situation with COVID around the world, but is that something that game developers, do a lot of as they're thinking through what they want to do? Like, what's your experience with sort of going to conferences from a game developer perspective?
Well, here locally we had we used to have a Nordic game conference where people from devs from all over the world would come. So I went to that a couple of times. In recent years, not so much. I haven't really had the time for it, and it's usually the admission fees are usually quite expensive as well.
Or you can find that on YouTube, the Game Developer Conference channel, and they have a category of videos that is, I think, failure videos. Or that's interesting, where you see when they report very honestly about their failures, and that's really really nice to watch. And they say, yeah, and we developed 100 years on that, and then it fails. It's really great. Have to see that.
Yeah, I've seen some of that content. It's quite interesting.
No, it's easy to take part in a game developer conference nowadays. Not need to move there or personally be there. I think that's easier handled at home in the living room.
I've got to thank Joe for that, because he introduced me to a lot of these, independent game festival and other conference podcasts, which is, in my real life, I get to attend conferences, but usually they're not filmed, and you never know what you're gonna find, and maybe you're missing the important thing next door. Having everything online on YouTube, even before COVID, that really eases up the process. That makes us very much more proficient, and also podcasts like yours, like SMS one thing, but for instance when GHD, Tortuga, Wolfpack, or History Guy, they all stream a game. I mean, it's a fantastic way to actually assess designs from other developers. I mean, there are two aspects here. First, I mean, it's so much better now than it was 20 years ago to be able to actually see someone play a game and come up with flows that maybe you wouldn't have identified as flows if you had played it yourself. That's one thing. Second thing is that all these game designers in the year 2021, they are all online. I mean, it's super easy to make links. This is why to get a relationship. That's why we are here with Joe and Nils. I mean, I was lucky to experience firsthand, contact with people like the creator of Cauldrons of War. I mean, we were mentioning that with GHD and Tortuga not long ago. Or I'm interacting often, online with Luke from Burden of Command. I heard him going on interviews, probably on SMS, including on SMS, but in other places too, and being able to exchange, views about game design. It's not just about being able to customize your game festival experience. It's also now you get to create your own little festival that is relevant to your project.
So I'm curious, some of your games, I know like Task Force Admiral and Sea Power are going to be real-time games, but Sea Power has an element of turn-based in the strategy, it seems, while games like Joe, your game, Second Front, is turn-based. So I'm curious how you guys approach turn-based games, or even systems within there like I Go, You Go, or We Go, because I know a lot of different players have really strong preferences. So from a design perspective, how do you think about that? How do you think about war games and turn-based versus real-time in your projects?
Now I've done a turn-based game where you move squares or move pieces one hex after the other. But in general, yes, and I think there must be something between a real-time game and a turn-based game. There must be something between that what is undiscovered, and that is not this move real time and then stop moving and then the game stops, and there must be more, and what is not worked out.
I mean, Combat Mission kind of had elements of that, especially before they, like the original ones where it was issue orders, play for a minute, see what happens. Issue orders, play for a minute, see what happens.
Yeah, that is this Vigo idea, but I have to say that even in board games, this Vigo doesn't really work. So,
Well, board games, of course, WeGo doesn't work. Board games is that's when it's the most difficult because
you have maybe the most famous is Diplomacy, where it works because there are only a few units, and then fewer units work better in Robo Rally, and then you have some Gladiator thing in real time in this Vigo. Also, we make write down decisions and then let go, and I think that is not really reactive to the player. So I not really like this combat mission style.
Everybody has their preferences, right? I mean, that's perfectly fine.
Myself, I'm a big fan of the combat mission WeGo, actually. Well, they reinvented it. To me, it's probably one of the biggest breakthrough in terms of innovation in regard of, the flow of the game and the command aspect of things, together with, there are stepstones, I mean, during this era, and I think close combat is one when it comes to the management, not just of real time, but of the troops, their morale, their emotions, their all this stuff that made them human. And then Combat Mission in its first iteration, well, you still can play WeGo today, of course, but in its first iteration, it was adding, a little bit more of uncertainty to all this again, because you are not supposed to intervene during the resolution of the turn, and it was like another revelation. I mean, in that regard, I mean, it brings me back to this. Just quickly, don't worry, man. The whole fog of war question is that here in our case, for instance, that's one of the perks that some people might not know, might not believe is a perk, but is that there's something that is usually not being talked about in a classic war game. It's friendly fog of war. That is, at a time like World War II, it's not like in Sea Power or Fleet Command where everybody's get a data link or a transponder, stuff like that. I mean, in World War II, it's just not not knowing about where is the enemy. It's also you not knowing where are your own troops. I mean, apart from the people you are visually in touch with, or perhaps people that are within your radar range. And when we're talking radar at that time, it's not over 90 kilometers. I mean, we are so used to tropes in movies and video games, and especially RTS tropes, of you sending a scout, and seeing what the scout sees. But it's not working. It didn't work like that back in 1942. First of all, you wouldn't have like a camera on the scout. You wouldn't know what he's seeing. But even worse than that, you wouldn't even know where is your scout. That's the first thing. Once it leaves your vision and leaves your radar range, then he's out there. So whenever he's going to report to you, even his position is going to be approximated because he's flying over water, and we do not have GPS. And you could have very well two scouts watching the same target and giving you a different position, because they will not zero on their own position the same way, because they did maneuvers and they were wrong about their estimate. That's one thing. Second thing being, crap, I lost my train of thought here. You also wouldn't know, also there's the whole question of radio silence. In modern day, there is the question of MCON, so that is something that is like that too. But at that time in World War II, MCON basically meant that emission control meant that you wouldn't be able to get in touch with your planes if you want to keep your position a secret, because signal intelligence existed back then already. So that means that when your planes are out there, they will only get in touch if they find something. So you will never know before they get back if they are still out there, if they are still alive. We have so many examples of scouts getting shot down before they could report. So that would mean you would never know before like another couple hours that this scout didn't come back, perhaps because it did find the enemy after all. But it could also have disappeared because of a mechanical problem. And you will never, except if you're an actual base, if you're a courier, you will never get in touch with them because you do not want to endanger your position, because thanks to radio interception, the enemy might very well zero in your position, and they will not need a scout to find you. So, I mean, these are aspects that have, to my knowledge, and they are existed on board games, but they've never been attempted on computer games before, and this is what we're headed for.
Yeah, there are many things that are in board games, what are not on computer games. Also, it is hard to describe how huge that is, and when you start thinking about wargaming, you think you can transfer reality to a computer game, or you can transfer a board game to a computer game, and that is that reality, or that is that rules in a board game, and then you can transfer that. And it is a little bit difficult to describe, but that's at least is my experience that it does not work, because you always have the player and his expectations, his experience in the past with other games where he now awaits the same. He wants that what he learned playing hours on other games is now the same in this new game, and that is a very difficult thing. And this player experience, also, so what he is doing and can do, that is what rules the game design most. And to ignore that, then the players will very fast tell you, yeah.
I have a good example of that actually. So in Atlantic Fleet, we of course incorporated submarines, and in reality, submarines always perform ambush attacks. That's the whole point of a submarine. The target doesn't know that the submarine is there and until the torpedoes hit. So we thought, well, we have to simulate this in a Battle of Atlantic game, of course. So what happens is that when you encounter submarines, sometimes a sub always has initiative, and it starts off by firing torpedoes at one of your ships, and it will hit, and probably that ship will sink. But then players become pissed off because they think it's unfair that their unescorted battleship gets sunk by a AI sub without them being able to do anything about it. And they start to complain about the RNG and AI is cheating. And so even if it's a perfectly realistic thing to happen within the context of a World War II naval simulation, they are pissed at that because it just feels unfair. And that,
I mean, I think this is, when people talk about AIs cheating, the problem is that there's so many AIs that do cheat, And honestly, some games are better for having an AI which cheats. You know, if you took at the AI cheating in a lot of games, they'd be a lot worse. They would be like unplayably bad, and not just because AI is so difficult to design. So yeah, when people guess that an AI is cheating, like probably 80% of the time they're correct. So it's an unfair thing to leverage universally, but it's also statistically backed up.
Well, I think the problem isn't so much that AI cheats because, like Sid Meier says, we sort of assume AI will cheat. But the problem is when the AI cheats in ways that are either too blatant or that are potentially game breaking. For instance, if you have like a let's say you have take an example here. Like, let's say you have a submarine game and you have these guided torpedoes and you fire them at another sub. The problem is that the AI is too dumb to use his sensors to detect your incoming torpedo and do something about it. So the way around this is you just put in a distance check. Oh, if a torpedo gets within 1,000 yards, it's ruled as detected and submarine starts taking evasive action. Well, that works perfectly well as long as the torpedo is faster than the submarine. But if you have a torpedo that is slower than the target submarine, then the target submarine will evade your attack every time, and that really sucks for you as a player if that slow torpedo is the only anti-sub weapon you get in that campaign. And yeah, and it's even more game breaking if said check affects all torpedoes and not just active pingers. Then it's can be truly campaign breaking.
I think I know what you're talking about here. I think I've played this campaign.
Yeah, also when you have this option on submarine games, you want to have dots on torpedoes or not. I don't know, when I'm playing games and I'm doing kind of relaxing thing, and yeah, and driving to Norway with every torpedo is a dot. I don't know. It's not fun. So I disabled that option.
No, why would you want to play a game where 80% of your torpedoes are duds? What's the fun in that?
And then you provide that option. Yeah, you know they were all bad torpedoes in the Norway campaign, and yeah, then you can switch that button, but you will not. And yeah, that is kind of game design. You have to decide that stuff. You have to make a realistic game, and then you roll back. Yeah, then you make a player have fun game out of that.
Well, we are in the entertainment business after all, so
Yes, that's true. We are in the entertainment business.
so at least the games I develop, I tend to develop games that I personally want to play, and I'm not really much of a, shall we say, like hardcore simulator
Yeah,
type of guy. I don't have a time, honestly, to get into those hardcore games that take up like entire days to play, because I have maybe like 1 or 2 hours of play time an evening. So I want something that can be,
yeah,
I just want to sit down, relax, and have fun.
yeah, and
Have a play.
that is a difficult thing to you cannot sorry, not you personally, I just say it like that. One cannot define fun simply. And
No, we can just hope that what's fun for us is also
yeah.
fun for other people, so they buy our games.
Yeah, I designed some scenarios for Second Front and what I have fun with, and then oh wow, I give these to playtesters, and then wow, they got wiped out.
Yeah, one thing that's readily apparent is that it's pretty easy to sit in isolation, and you have this great idea, and you make it, and you learn to, as you make it, you learn to enjoy it and get fun out of it. But when you then give it to players, they don't like it at all, because your design is too idiosyncratic, or it's flawed somehow, or it's just it's tedious to operate, or it's just not fun for the majority of people. And I think that's uh, a very real hit to fall into if you're not careful. So I always tend to like test my ideas on people I know, friends that I know, other game designers, to see if this a bad idea, or is it so if I just sat in like isolation and made C power on my own, and I could end up with something that's a flop, and that would really that would really suck.
Yeah, the feedback is also very difficult. Also, also when I give a scenario or game or campaign, whatever, I give it to a player, and then I think, will he notice this or that? And then I hope, and yeah. And then I get his feedback, and then he's telling me something totally different. So, yeah, so that's something I really can count 100% on that what I get back is not what I awaited. That is always, and even when you look then in one of the feedback, so yeah, he's saying maybe, yeah, that tank was too strong or something. And even then, it is not, you have to translate that. Also, that is my experience. And have to translate the player feedback to something different, because they say X, but they mean Y, and you understand that. Yeah, also this is the communication feedback on playtest is a very hard thing. That is also, as always in this game design, you have to learn things you never have thought that exist on the planet. Also, there's so much to learn and on techniques, but also on soft skills and social things. You have to learn so many things on the fly in the meanwhile, and you have to be super smart to react to things, to skip whole parts what you planned in a minute and invent other things on the fly and change things. That is, I'm really amazing. That is maybe the most fun and interesting part, but it's also the very hard part. This always anything new every day. Wow.
Yeah, and of course, sometimes you really have to bite the bullet and just throw out an entire, perhaps big part of your design because it doesn't work. One of the things that I have learned over years is to accept that possibility, and just accept having to do it when I have to. It's like I've had some pretty big concepts that I just had to scratch, because I invested quite some time into developing them, but in the end they just had to be thrown out because nope, that shit ain't gonna work. Like we had a C power, we had a really cool damage control system that was sort of like a mashup between Great Naval Battles and Cold Waters, where you had damage control teams, and you would get fires or floodings in different compartments, and you get subsystems damaged, and you would deploy pumps, and you would deploy damage control teams to contain the fires, and you could deploy more than one team to a certain compartment to maybe contain a threatening fire or something. But then eventually we realized that you're gonna have so many you're going to have so many units under your command, and things are going to happen so fast when they happen that you're not going to have time to sit around and micro damage control teams on every one of your ships. Like, that's just not going to be fun. So why waste any more time on it? Nope, cut that feature. It's not worth it.
Yeah, very, very true. Also, the same here. I had a base camp where you can repair your tanks and all that, and then and I presented that to also Microprose. Say, hi, what do you think about that? And then you hear people saying, and I very hard learned when you hear that, that means no. And then I presented the other idea, the shift map, what I showed in a video where you can continue the map, and they say, oh yeah, that's nice, I want that. Yeah, that is yes.
Well, I hate to jump in here, guys, because I'm loving this back and forth and discussion, but I do think, at least on my end anyway, it's almost 3:30 in the morning, so I'm gonna have to wrap things up. I want to thank you all for coming on to Single Malt Strategy, but I did want to give you guys a chance to kind of say if there's anything you wanted to talk about or say or whatnot. I want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of give your closing or elevator pitch if you haven't, and then I think we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, well, I would love to talk more in depth about my game, about Sea Power, of course, but
yeah, we'll definitely we got to have all you guys back on. Selfishly, I mean, if it ends up working out, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, I would. If that happens, I would really like to be able to bring the other guys on the team on as well, because in the end, I'm just a mediocre art and design guy, so I don't understand all of the really technical stuff.
Well, don't sell yourself short. To that point, I want to thank you for coming on, Nils. I know Sea Power is definitely one of the games that I'm really looking forward to. I think there's sort of a dearth of 3D modern-ish, like sort of post World War II naval games. I mean, there's a dearth of naval games to begin with, but I know that's one of them that.
Yeah, but almost all of the ones that exist are just World War.
Yeah, but even the ones that are World War II, most of them are old. Like most of them are like great naval battles back in the 90s, or games that are like 20 plus years old. There's a handful of newer World War II games, but there's not a ton.
Yeah, and the ones that have come out recently tend to be. I find most of them to be sort of flawed. Like, they have potential, but for whatever reason, they just don't work for me. I mean, I can still play something like Strike Fleet from 1988, and I can be pretty entertained by that. But some of these new games that come out, yeah, not my cup of tea, So, which is why I'm doing my own thing here. I mean, like we said before, no one's really done a nice 3D action strategy light sim naval game since Fleet Command, and that was 22 years ago. So
yeah, I know I'm excited for it. Joe, I also want to thank you for coming on, talking about Second Front. Anything you want to mention before we wrap it up?
I think World War II is thing to go. It is the most mechanic, the most physic in action, and that is and will be the most compelling thing to simulate. And yes, that's what my game is about. And I agree to Nils that one have to make games that oneself has fun to play.
And Amiral, anything you want to add about Task Force Admiral?
Yeah, just two little things. First would be say, well, just a point of detail. I mean, Nils mentioned games that come out as of late, and have limits. I think it's 2021. I'm not saying that There is no limit to be had anymore. Obviously, a computer is still not an unlimited amount of calculation power or anything. But I mean, we're not in 1994 either. I'm gonna give you an example, guys. I mean, now we're asking the questions just for this time. I mean, THD Tortuga, you tell me. I mean, how much planes were in the air between 9 and 10 a.m. at Midway? Yeah, do you have an idea? How many would you say?
400? I don't know.
That's on point. 400. That was actually that. You know, it was like 400 planes out there. And I mean, I'm not saying, you know, over the whole Pacific or whatever. I mean, that was a big square northwest of Midway. There were 400 planes there, along with 20 ships for the Kido Butai, the Carrier Strike Force, 26 for the American force, and then you add all the submarines, and then you got Yamamoto and the main body 300 miles behind, and then you got the invasion convoy under Tanaka, the screen under Kondo Kurita. I mean, it's like more than 100 ships. Tell me, until now, have you ever seen something like that in a game that says that it's recreating Midway?
You mean something which models every single one of those?
Yes. I mean, yeah, even in 2D, honestly.
Well, maybe Rule of Waves. I don't think it models every individual airplane, though.
Yeah, maybe Rule the Waves, or maybe even, I mean, I would put Carriers at War in there. I mean, they did that too, except, I mean, it was all 2D and all that. I mean, this is what we're going for. I think that beyond all the game design questions and all that are totally relevant, and I agree with Joe and Nils and all that, there are some good ideas that end up not being good ideas. The mere fact of trying to recreate the environment to the point of having the right unique number count and the right doctrine for it, I think that this is the sort of achievement we're aiming for, and I sure hope that you will appreciate the effort when finally something comes out of it. That's the first thing. Second thing, I mean, it's like Neil said, I mean, I would be happy at some point when we have something playable to come back here together with my team, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank them, because I mean, okay, Nils is saying that he's just an illustrator, just an artist, but I'm even less than that myself. I mean, I have zero talent outside of my big mouth and actually paying for the lunch of my guys. This is something that is very specific here. I mean, I've got a developer, I've got a 3D artist, I've got a 2D artist, and I've got a lot of people out there who are helping us. But the only thing I contribute to technically is game design and selling my house years ago just so that it could happen. And I wanted to thank Jean-Baptiste and Julien and Risky for being so good at what they do and being so faithful in what we do together. And I sure hope that next time we will have an opportunity to give them a voice too.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely, we got to have all you guys back on selfishly. I mean, if it ends up working out, I'd be very happy.
I appreciate you all for coming on. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed the time, and we'll definitely have to have you guys back on as your games get a little bit closer to release, or maybe after they come out, to talk to you guys kind of one-on-one in a bit more depth about your games. But I found it fascinating to hear you guys talking back and forth as well. You know, kind of at the end there, a little bit about your own philosophies and approaching games. I want to thank you guys for coming, and that's going to do it for this episode. So everybody, once again, thanks for listening to episode number 67 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. This is a Microprose special with the developers of Task Force Admiral, Second Front, and Sea Power naval combat in the missile era. And until next time, this is Matt with Eric saying thanks for listening, and we're out.